Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy Etten, and I'm the Vice President of Client Engagement for the Million Women Mentors Women in Insurance Initiative. Welcome to today's webinar, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging in Insurance, an Open and Honest Dialogue. We hope you enjoyed this conversation and that you come away feeling informed and inspired to take action. We're so glad to have you here today, and we hope that you will engage with us in the chat throughout the webinar. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the Lieutenant Governor of Delaware, Bethany Long Hall.
Hi, I'm Bethany Hall Long, Lieutenant Governor of Delaware and National and Delaware Co-Chair of Million Women Mentors. I'm really excited to be here to kick off today's event, the Million Women Mentors and STEM Connectors Women in Insurance webinar. The Women in Insurance Initiative is really committed to increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion in the insurance industry and promoting insurance as a desirable, stimulating, and opportunity-rich industry for women in STEM. Insurance is STEM. The possibilities of having a meaningful career in the insurance industry are endless. However, there is considerable work to be done to ensure that the insurance industry has a diverse, robust, and sustainable STEM workforce that it needs to keep pace with the accelerating rate of changes in today's world. A diverse workforce is critical to the future of the industry. This webinar focuses on last year's United States House Committee's report, Diversity and Inclusion, Holding America's Largest Insurance Companies Accountable. The objectives of our webinar include raising awareness about the report, as well as offering insights from key industry leaders and influencers on practical steps that we together can take to drive change. So thank you for participating in today's webinar. Now I will hand this over to our wonderful panel to start the discussion.
Good afternoon, and welcome to our webinar on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in insurance. We have quite a powerful conversation prepared for all of you today. I'm Margaret Ressi-Milkent, Global Insurance Practice Leader at Diversified Search Group and the Chair of the Women in Insurance Initiative, a Million Women Mentors STEM Connector. The Million Women Mentors Women in Insurance Initiative is a consortium of organizations throughout the insurance industry. We're committed to increasing diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in the industry, and doing it with action. We promote insurance as an opportunity-rich industry for women in STEM. Today's webinar takes a deep dive into a recent report from the U.S. House Committee on Financial Services, and this study is called Diversity and Inclusion, Holding America's Largest Insurance Companies Accountable. The congressional report released last fall found that there's still a lot of work to do in the insurance industry to advance diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Racial, ethnic, and gender representation was significantly lacking among employees at the largest U.S. insurance companies. Our panelists today come from diverse backgrounds across the industry and the DEI space. We're going to be speaking about this report, its findings, and offer insights into the practical steps, the actionable steps that organizations and individuals can take to drive meaningful progress and change, and advance that needle that we talk about in DEI and B in insurance. So without further ado, I'm so excited to welcome the panelists here, my colleagues, my friends on this journey. Dr. Leroy Nunnery, President, Evolution Advisors, who testified before Congress concerning the recent report. Omari Aarons, Executive Director and Chief Operating Officer of the National African American Insurance Association. Laura Deutscher, Non-Executive Director. And this conversation will be moderated by Meg Green, Managing Editor, Insider Engage. So, Meg, thank you for joining us, and over to you.
My pleasure, Margaret. Thank you for that great introduction. I was hoping to start with Dr. Nunnery, if you could set the stage for us and share what some of the big takeaways were from the congressional hearing that you spoke at.
Well, thanks, Meg. A study like the one the House Financial Services Committee conducted is unusual because it not only looked back over a 5-year period, but it was spurred by two very powerful congresspersons, Maxine Waters from California, who then chaired that committee, and Joyce Beatty from Ohio, who was the subcommittee chair for diversity and inclusion. Probably the first time ever that Congress has taken a deep dive into financial services, into hiring practices, trends, dynamics, et cetera. So that was the first big takeaway, that it's momentous that they had this study done. There was a broad agreement amongst the 27 companies who responded to their questions on diversity, how it was described, who it includes in terms of race, gender, ethnicity, and so on. Interestingly, of the 27 companies that responded, most of them were life insurers and not P&C companies. And the reason why that's notable is that property and casualty companies particularly hire a significant number of folks of color and or in a diverse categories. So we may not have captured everything, but there's a lot of parallels. There were commitments made by several of the companies, and if anyone gets a copy of the study, they'll see the types of commitments companies made to either social justice, community development, or in terms of hiring and promotions. Size matters. That is, the larger the companies are, and most of these were over a certain size in terms of direct written premiums, they tended to have deeper, longer standing programs with more structure. Smaller companies, and I found this in another study I did for the APCIA, tend to have singular individuals who report into somebody but don't have enough power or heft to pull things off. Other quick things: pay ranges and position descriptions were noted as one way, if you will, reachable way that companies could effectuate change, by looking at how compensation works, but also how jobs were described, and I might add workload balance, particularly for women in the workplace, tends to be a big issue. Evaluation of DEI programs through metrics. In fact, there's a recommendation to form a D&I, Data Accountability and Transparency Act that didn't go very far beyond the committee, but a way to tie it into Dodd-Frank and into the Consumer Financial Protection Act, and making that mandatory, that there's data accountability that can be reported out regularly. And then lastly, another series of legislative proposals. So what this committee tried to do was not only look back, but also suggest things that would work going forward. Probably the biggest takeaways that I could call out.
Were there any surprises in the congressional report? Was there anything that revealed that you think we should focus on in today's conversation?
Yeah, Meg, I think, and I'm sure my colleagues will jump on this too. Surprisingly, on this day that we testified, no CEOs from any of the insurance companies who reported in showed up. And it was noted by the congresspersons that there wasn't representation. Now, why they weren't there, I can't explain. But interestingly, the same committee had convened and had written similar reports on diversity and inclusion and for investment advisors and banks. And I believe that some leaders from those two sectors did show up. So it's notable about the absence. Interestingly, there was a low level of spending with diverse companies in terms of supplier diversity. I mean, we're talking about under 5% when it comes to women or minorities or disadvantaged businesses. And so it could be that insurance companies don't buy, widgets, right? So they may not have that same type of spend, but professional services and other opportunities do exist. And it was noted that there are not enough dollars going back into communities, into smaller businesses, let's say, or part of supply chain. There was an amazing consistency with other studies. That was one of my big surprises. I would think that this study might find something that was dramatically different. That surprise was not met. But because of APCIA, the work with, and I'm sure Amari will talk about this, the journey of African American insurance professionals, all of these studies, when you put them together, are scatter plotted and congregated when you start looking at the results. That there's low representation, particularly as you go further up the curve in the executive suites, and that there tends to be a lot of long tenure in jobs that pay well, but they aren't the jobs that drive the company forward. Lastly, I'd say that the lack of participation in some quadrants, LGBTQIA plus, students of color, you're seeing a lot of effort to reach those communities, but you don't see it reflected in the workforce. So those are some of the surprises. There are others, but those come to mind.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Nunnery. I'd like to turn to the panel and get your thoughts on the recommendations of the report. And Omari, maybe you could kick us off on that.
Sure. Thank you, Meg. And in short, ditto to everything Dr. Nunnery just said, right? These recommendations really come from a confluence of other reports that have been put out in the industry, certainly the Journey of African American Insurance Professionals and the Next Steps on the Journey study, both of which Dr. Nunnery authored in partnership with Naya and Marsh McLennan. And certainly as I looked at the recommendations that were listed in the congressional report, which are broken down into 4 parts, thinking about the workforce, board and executive leadership, supplier diversity, and DEI practices and policies. All the recommendations there are not only actionable, but really important. Dr. Nunnery mentioned compensation and work-life flexibility. I think those are 2 key areas. And 2 others that I would lift up for our conversation. One is the importance of data. Really important to understand who's in your workforce, what is the experience that they're having, and making sure that we are using data in ways that we can make meaningful change. So segmenting on the intersections of identities is really important. And for example, when we think about climate in the workplace, or we think about whether a policy is effective, we like to say as organizations that 91% of people say this or 75% of people say that. But if we're really trying to understand a particular experience, say the experience of women returning from parental leave, the majority rules type of setup that we have for our data doesn't really give us the insight, right? It does not matter what I think about the experience of women returning from maternity leave, right? It really matters for the women who are returning. And so we have to be more comfortable to dive into the segmentation and data to really understand the experience that people are having. And then the other would be, there's a recommendation in here that for football fans out there is the Rooney Rule, to make sure that one person of color, one woman is being considered in the pool of candidates, at a minimum, I should say, one person of color, one woman is being considered for executive roles and board roles. And I've seen in my work companies who have studied their own success rate with this approach and who have found that their data shows when there's only one in, say, a final pool of 5 that is a candidate who's bringing racial, ethnic, or gender diversity, that person almost never ends up being the final candidate. But when there are 2 in that final 5, the chances of hiring someone who, in addition to being highly qualified and having the skill set to doing the job, also brings racial, ethnic, and/or gender diversity to the table is much higher. So those are 2 recommendations that, if no one else pays attention to anything else in the report, I would say to look at the data and the talent pools around executive leadership roles.
That's great insight, Amari. Thank you. And Margaret, I saw you nodding a lot to what he was saying. Would you want to weigh in?
I absolutely do. I completely agree with Dr. Nunnery, with Omari. I mean, this is about action and intention. And this is, the recommendations I think are really practical. If you move that needle from 1 to 2, you will make a change, right? So it's not that we just want it to happen. We have to make it happen, and we can, in these very clear, relatively simple ways. A lot of people say it's hard. It's not. It just takes some extra effort. It takes that extra care, and it takes that intention and the purpose that goes along with it.
And Laura, did you want to comment on that as well?
I did, and I would suggest, and I ditto for everything everyone's already said, and thank you for including me in this conversation. I could see being overwhelmed by all the recommendations, because each section and each topic is so important when you go through the study. And then there's lists underneath that, and there's a list underneath that. And I would think what I would recommend is the most actionable thing is start somewhere. Start somewhere. You don't have to solve for all of these issues at the same time, but start making progress on a handful of them. And every organization is at a different stage of their journey. Some are much further along. Some are just, putting their toe in, dipping their toe into the situation. So you have to factor that in mind, but start the conversations, start asking the questions. In insurance, to Amari's point, isn't it a data driven? So start with the measures, start with the metrics, pick one, pick one metric that you're going to look at and kind of slice and dice across the demographics and so forth, and set some targets towards it. Because, what you measure and tracking against it matters. And it link that into your other processes, incentives and so forth. That gets people's attentions. But I would just say start somewhere, and then you can build on that, get some quick and start getting the conversations out there and learning and adjusting. So, but very actionable.
That's great, Laura. Thank you. If we could jump over to Margaret, the report found a high percentage of women in lower level roles, but few seem to make it up to the C-suite. And could you talk a little bit about what obstacles prevent women from advancing, and what would you like to see companies do to support more women rising to the C-suite?
Meg, that's one of the most powerful data points that has been consistent, and Lee said that as well. We have seen that, we have more women really that enter the workforce, but they don't get to that next level, okay? We've heard it called the frozen middle, and that's true. I also think that there becomes some inertia at that level of moving up, and it's a combination of not knowing. Maybe it's a little bit of fear. Maybe it's not having a mentor. Maybe it's that lack of confidence that many of us have in ourselves. We can call it imposter syndrome, or we could just call it fear. This is what we're facing. And what I've learned on this journey is that it's one victory at a time. It's not the big step that always makes the difference. It's those tiny little baby steps in between. It's that mentorship, that sponsorship of somebody listening, not just to the data. The data is powerful, but what does the data mean? And what does the data mean to me? And how can I make that change? How can I make that change and lift another woman up? That's where we've been winning, frankly, Meg. We've been winning. It's a ground war. It's grassroots and it's a ground war. So I'm going to just tell a tiny story, and it's a powerful one. So this afternoon, I sat with 15 amazing women in a conference room in downtown Chicago. And we talked about unconscious bias. But I will tell you where the conversation went. And it did it in such a powerful, organic way. It went to humanity. It went to listening. It went to empathy. It went to feeling and believing in ourselves and our own power and what our own personal journeys were. So we want to judge against each other? No. You never look, when you're doing yoga, you never look at the person next to you. You just focus on your mat. So yes, we got to focus on our mat. And it is like yoga because there is no perfect. It's practice. We have to give ourselves the gift to grant each other grace and trust along the way. And that's what I'm feeling. That's where I'm feeling why we need an intersection between the data and the purpose and the passion. Maybe that's a way forward. At least I feel that's a way forward for me.
I love that, Margaret. I have to tell you, when I'm not talking about insurance, I am a yoga and meditation teacher. So I appreciate that analogy very much. Yeah, there's no competition in yoga. There's no, it's not like the heavyweight champion of yoga. It doesn't, we all go at our own pace. But yeah, I appreciate that very much. So on a similar theme, if we could turn back to Dr. Nunnery, why aren't there more people of color in the C-suite, and what can be done to support the growth there?
I think Margaret hit on something that is essential, and everywhere I go, I'll ask, how many of you knew you were going to be in insurance when you were in high school? And out of 100 people, maybe 2 hands go up. How about college? Maybe 3 hands. And it shows that means 96, 7, 8% of the folks who are in the business today were introduced somehow. And it usually wasn't through a recruiter. It usually wasn't through an ad. It was through somebody who was already in the business. It's relationship driven. And those relationships matter, have to be fostered. You have to be mentored, introduced in. You have to be supported and sponsored. So when we do a historical look back, we see that particularly African Americans have been in insurance since, the early 1700s. You can go back that far. We can also look at how enslaved people were insurable property. But the biggest issue now, when we're kind of focusing on 2023, is that without the vibrant talent lines, somebody who's in the business reaching back, but also introducing insurance as a financial literacy tool, or maybe a financial acumen, it goes along with everything that you do to invest, or how you save your money, or how you buy your house. And I think we've mystified insurance so much that it doesn't translate. That's at the front end. But for those who are already in the business, what we're finding is that many individuals, particularly women in the next step studies, will stay in the business 15, 20, 25 years, but they plateau, just like Margaret, I think, was talking about. And I think the biggest issue right now is, that's the platform from which you get promoted and ascend. So there's got to be a lot more of a vocal, I'll use the word protest, but acclamation is a better word, about the talents that these folks have, the skills that they've acquired, the knowledge of the company. I mean, if you really want to know what's going on, you don't necessarily ask the senior most person. You ask somebody who's there as a functionary who really understands how things are working. And I think for students of color, executives of color, some of that knowledge is there, but it doesn't get tapped. Those companies that will succeed, not only in this area, but in terms of market capitalization, reach, brand equity, are going to be the ones who capitalize on that talent, because they recognize it may not be a hidden asset, but it is certainly an untapped one.
That's great. Thank you, Dr. Nunnery. Laura, could we get you back in the conversation? I was hoping you could share your thoughts on getting more women and more diversity up to the C-suite.
But I want to go back to something Margaret said, because I do think, and I'm speaking from personal experience here. So I, fell into Dr. Nunnery's point, fell into insurance in the 90s and raised 3 daughters while working in continuing higher level roles in multiple insurance organizations. And I hid my pregnancies for the longest time because it was going to impact how I was seen and viewed. That was kind of the culture. There was no one ahead of me to kind of say, how did you balance this change in life and working and so forth? So I took it upon myself as I got older and continued to progress in organizations to help others along. I had women working for me when I was at CNA remotely after they had kids. No one knew it. It wasn't like a part of a program. It was just the right thing to do. And if it was easier for her to go home early, have dinner with her children, and then get back online at, 8 o'clock, then that was fine. But I had the experience to say, this is what we need. I want to keep this talent in the organization, so we're going to adjust. So it's having those experiences, whether it be as a woman, a person of color, LGBTQ, you have those experiences you bring to the situation and opens your eyes and your lenses to situations. And how do you replicate that? And it also is being at the table. I was speaking more from my operational experience, but sitting around the board is like asking the questions of, how come we don't have parental leave? How does that make sense? How does someone, when 70% of our workforce are women, how do you not have paid leave? Who has the luxury of not working, or not working and not getting paid and taking that much time off? So those things have to be looked at, but someone has to use their voice, feel comfortable. I wasn't comfortable as a person going through it, but I became comfortable and my voice got louder and more passionate as I got more secure, more senior, and so forth. So we need more of those situations. And it's, I don't know if it's just the way the system has been set up. Actually, Dr. Nunnery and I were talking about that the other day. Things like kids, school ends at 3. That doesn't work for working parents. So how have we not adjusted things like that? And, you have this aha moment of things that are just the way things are built in. So being in a position where we can question things, not aggressively, not whatever, but have we thought about this? Have we taken this into consideration? And as a woman, I have been able to bring those types of topics into the room based on my own prior experience. And that's some of the power of having different viewpoints and having different backgrounds. So, and people are open to it. Sometimes they just don't realize because they haven't experienced it. So
I think that ties into what Amari was saying early on in the conversation about it's important to ask the people who are affected. And you actually, Amari, you gave that example of a working mother. And it's important that those voices are heard, right? So Laura, staying with you, I know you serve on a couple boards. Does your experience on those boards resonate with the findings of the report?
Absolutely. And, I mentioned a little earlier, every company, every board's on a different journey. But the topics and the best practices, what the recommendations that were in the report, where I have seen more progress made, maybe at a faster clip, is when those types of best practices and actions are put into place. As I mentioned earlier, making the measures and the metrics, we track everything, right? You hold people accountable for financial results and so forth. We need to be holding people accountable and companies accountable for these types of measures as well. And that can start at the board. It can be with the CEO. It can start grassroots with conversations. So it is a matter of where the organizations are in the journey, and you have to, what's the saying? You have to eat an elephant one bite at a time or something. You just can't go after the whole thing. But where I've seen the most impact is when the CEO is, this is what we're doing. This is my expectation, setting targets, and holding people accountable and through their incentive and pay and so forth. And that's where and whatever that thing that caused them to do that was a personal situation, if it's just how they are and it's the right thing to do, or where they've actually seen it has a positive impact on the business and the bottom line and the results, wherever the impetus has come from. But that's where I've seen the most progress and conversations, and we're all in different journeys. So each one's in a different place right now. So.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. So can we look out into other industries and discuss who's doing a good job, or maybe a better job than insurers, and not to compare industries, but who is doing a good job handling the DEIB challenge, and what can we learn from them? And Margaret, maybe you'd want to kick us off on that.
So before we go outside of insurance, I want to do a big shout out to Beasley, because Beasley does do parental leave. Actually, I've had the pleasure of knowing 2 new fathers that had 6 months of parental leave. So Beasley, I think you're leading the way. It's great to shine the light on that. It's happening. And it wasn't happening before, but it is happening now. And Laura, I so related, to you. I hid my pregnancies as well. I breastfed, and I hid that too. We didn't talk about that humanity. And, going back full circle here, I mean, this is true. Women have babies, and men are fathers, and men want to be involved with their kids, and we all want to be there. And, I saw my mom and dad work outside of the home. They found a way. They juggled. They had a village. I was blessed to have a village with my mom and dad, and a legion of babysitters and neighbors who put their arms literally around my kids. But this is the village that I think we're all creating. And we are doing better. I know that we're doing better, but we have to accelerate. That's my cry. That's my hope. That's my prayer, that we accelerate and we go forward. So as I look out, I think that STEM is a wonderful beacon for young women to come into so many industries, including insurance. And it's a great leveler, right? It's a leveler, because you have that beautiful mind that can focus on data, analytics, technology, risk, finance, the power of numbers and technology will elevate your career in so many different sectors, including insurance. So I'm always going to go back to insurance, Meg, because I think we need the talent here, but I will spread the love, to all the industries. And I think STEM is really just a great focus, and a big shout out to STEM Connector Million Women Mentors for welcoming in students and parents and educators and teaching them about careers in insurance, whether it be actuarial science or analytics or technology. We've got an aged industry. We have aging infrastructure, and we need that fresh talent to come in and infuse us. So I am very excited about the future of insurance. I feel like we've got a long way to go on this journey, but we're on it. We're doing it, and I am going to celebrate every win. That's my commitment to all of you. I'm going to celebrate each and every win. And before I finish here, Meg, I'm going to tell you, I've seen one female CEO pass to another female CEO in my career. I want to see hundreds of that C-suite executive. I've seen so many great women like Laura join corporate boards. And it's not just that one woman on the board. It's 2 and it's 3, to your point, Omari. That's where we make the change.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Margaret, can I make one follow-on comment? Just one of the things you brought up, talent and the aging workforce. And as I've had some of our board conversations, that's where we get to on a lot of this, the why behind the diversity. You could go from it's the right thing to do, which absolutely is the right thing to do. You could sit there and say it improves your bottom line and so forth. You could do it from a personal perspective, but we have a huge talent crisis that we're about to. And if we exclude all diverse women, people of color, LGBTQ, veterans, disabled will have no resources to work with because, you know, our industry is aging, people are leaving. We need to be attracting and including and absorbing and promoting and retaining and celebrating and being excited of having those folks in our organizations, or we will have empty desks where we can't service our customers. We can't provide the insurance and protection promises that we've made to our policyholders and so forth. So it's actually, I think of it from a risk perspective as well, putting my audit and risk committee hat on. And that's been, you know, resonated in situations as well. So.
Laura, that is so powerful because talent risk is real. This war for talent is real. And what's very real right now is a talent tug of war. There is a tug of war for talent. So these opportunities, I think, that organizations have to lift and to grow, to elevate, to amplify, this is what we have to do to keep our talent, to make organizations' cultures sticky. When we're talking about belonging, we're talking about stickiness. We're talking about humanity and caring and concern. That's the hidden paycheck. People leave organizations not for money. They leave because nobody remembered their birthday, or when their mom, and that's me, was diagnosed with moderate dementia. I had people wrapping their arms around me, literally, figuratively. What can we do? How can we help? We love your mom. How can we help you? It's almost the reverse, Laura. You know, as I think about raising the kids and now caring for mom, I'm at the bookends, right? It's the bookends. And this is life. This is the journey. It's not always pretty. It's not perfect, Meg. Yoga was one of my silver linings of COVID. I came to it. I love it. And I'm never going to leave it. Never going to leave it. Everybody knows where I am at 6 or 6:30 most nights. Makes a difference. I mean, that's the humanity. But we have to figure that out. I mean, Omari, I know how important humanity is to you and Lee. I mean, that's where this all starts. I mean, let's get the data right. Let's get the action right. But let's not forget about mental health and about aging parents and about the post-traumatic stress syndrome of COVID-19. That's very real from all kids from 2 to 30. 2 to 30. That's what my friend Dr. Kate tells me. It's 2 to 30. We have real things that we're tackling, and we can do it because we have an industry that is powerful and is good and does good.
And Dr. Nunnery, you look like you were ready to jump in the conversation here.
Well, you know, you asked about other industries, and what is fascinating if you look at consumer products, Pepsi, Walgreens, Darden restaurants. I mean, you know, there are exemplars of industry sectors or verticals where diversity has been introduced. Starbucks, Melody Hobson, you know, chair of the board. I mean, it's been done. And I always wondered, even going back decades now, coming out of school, why that is. Why is financial services so far removed from everybody else? Is it because of the lack of exposure? Is it because those good old boy or girl networks tend to be tighter? I don't know. I don't have the answer yet. Maybe I'll do some more research on it. But I'm finding that those companies and industries that have a lot of consumer facing products and services tend to have a greater advance in terms of positions of influence and power. And that gets to, Meg, your earlier question, why aren't there more? Well, if you're not in that position, you can't influence hiring. You can't influence new markets to go into. So the reason I'm doing what I'm doing now is to try to crack through that, but it's taking a long time to get traction. So these conversations are important because they raise awareness and they show that it's possible, as I know Margaret believes. I just wonder if we're at a moment where people have gotten complacent and we need to really push hard to say, no, don't stop now. because the work isn't done. You see a few faces and then everybody goes off to celebrate. I think that's premature.
I think this is the time to double down.
I agree. I mean, and that's, Lee, you balance me. I mean, we always feel that I am such a believer and so passionate in going forward. I think what Lee and I do for each other is we do this ebb and flow, Lee, and you're right. We have to be impatient. We have to be positive, but we have to be impatient, and we have to make it happen now. This is a moment, and I never want to hear anybody tell me that they have fatigue about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I just go like this. There's nothing to be fatigued about. We've got too much work to do. Because you're right, that complacency, it's that check the box mentality. I did that, or my ERG is working on that. I love the ERGs. They need support. You know, it's back to, they're filling everybody else's bathtub. They need to have their own bathtubs filled. This is what a group like the Women in Insurance Initiative can do. With webinars like this, with programming, with mentorship, with just ideas, you know, that lift, you know, and they give you a little bit of hope and that push. So you get the spring back in your step and you can get up tomorrow and do it all over again. And we're all good at doing it all over again. I just think we got to do it faster.
Yeah.
Yeah, you raised some very good points. I think there's a lot of frustration out there that the insurance industry is still lagging behind other industries in terms of diversity and leadership. So hoping to get Amari back in the conversation. What will it take to move the needle on getting more diversity into the insurance industry?
Yeah, I love the conversation that we're having, you know, and I would actually go back to one of the key findings in the Next Steps on the Journey study, and I'm fortunate to be sitting here with like the experts, since Dr. Nunnery was the author of this report. You know, one of the findings of the study is that there's a significant amount of movement and activity around DEI, but not the progress, right? That really is the point. That's the rub where people are so frustrated. And there's so much of this that we know that also contributes to the frustration. So like we know that having a good manager is part of the equation, where you have consistent feedback on your performance and someone who's helping you to develop and hone your skills. We know that mentors and sponsors are critical, and I would add coaches to that. Though even in our data from the Next Steps on the Journey study, the number of people who even today are reporting that they don't have access to a mentor, that they don't know if there's anyone in their organization who is serving as a sponsor to them or anyone like them, or that they don't have access to coaching, right? Like those numbers are incredibly high. And I used to say, you know, people are over-mentored and under-sponsored, but I think what the data is showing is that, you know, we are still at the point where people need more mentors, which is why I'm so glad this organization exists. Right. And so then the other piece that came out in the study is, and we know that stretch assignments, right? Strong manager, mentor, sponsor, coach, all are critical to helping people move forward in organizations and advance. And one of the ways is gaining exposure through stretch assignments and other developmental opportunities. One of the pieces that we heard in the Next Steps study from participants is that assignments related to diversity, equity, and inclusion are not valued in the same way as other business stretch assignments. And so, you know, to your point, Margaret, right, like when we talk about employee resource groups, ERGs, BRGs, colleague resource groups, if you're in the Marsh McLennan family, right, you know, being an ERG leader or helping to build a supplier diversity strategy for your organization, or helping to develop training that gets rolled out, right? If these critical elements are not valued in the same way as other assignments, we have to get really real about answering the question, are we actually committed to advancing DEI beyond a surface level action to make our workplaces and our industry more inclusive? We're not talking about launching ERGs for us to put on a program during Black History Month or Women's History Month to have one really good panel discussion a year, right? Where what we're after when we talk about meaningful change is that you have an ERG who is catering to the employee experience, helping to create stickiness among employees, to the industry and to the company at large, but that you also have ERG leaders who are serving as advisors with significant influence to senior leaders, people in the C-suite throughout the organization, right? And so that's how you take an action that someone says, well, we just need to make sure we have ERGs that's on their checklist, and take it from something that is just about checking a box on the list as an action to get done, to really helping to move the strategy forward and move the work forward inside of your organization.
That's great, Amari. Thank you for that. And I think that leads us to what could be the most important part of our discussion today, which is what can people do? And I'm going to guess our audience is, we probably have, I'm hoping, some C-suite. So if we could talk about what can the C-suite do to help move the needle on this, and then let's talk about what people who are not in the C-suite can do. Your regular, well, non-C-suite folks who might be tuning into us. Margaret, would you like to kick us off on this one?
Yeah, and I think that my suggestion is universal. Doesn't matter where you sit. If you're in the C-suite, you're on the screen, you're in the building, be a mentor and be mentored. I think that it is so important to give back, and to have the experience of mentoring is powerful, but to be mentored and to put yourself out there and be vulnerable, to learn and to grow and to stretch and to challenge, conventional thinking, your own bias, my own bias. Learn so much, whether it's, a peer mentor or a reverse mentor or a different person mentor. Think about, a mentor group, a personal advisory board of people that you allow your most vulnerable self to be out there to say, I want to grow, I want to develop, I want to get to the next level, help me. Okay, that does take courage, and it does take an environment of psychological safety. I talked about fear. Let's break down the fear. Let's break that down. Let's do it together. It's real, but allowing ourselves to give grace and to receive grace makes all the difference in the world. So that's my wish and my hope and my prayer.
That's great, Margaret. Dr. Nunnery, did you want to weigh in on this?
Well, I think, and Amari and I have talked about this multiple times. Margaret and I have. Laura and I just got really acquainted. The sense I have right now is that I call it an interstitial moment. We're at a vortex. We're at a pivot point. However you want to describe it, there's significant pushback on diversity, equity, inclusion, either as a term, in terms of hiring, fairness, discussions about critical race theory. I mean, all of this is going on in our daily lives, excuse me, in politics, in economics. The wealth gaps that exist between certain communities are astounding. And so, in fact, one study says that for African Americans, that we won't catch up. We won't have any average or median net worth by the year 2035 at the current rate of dis-saving and disinvestment. I mean, think about that. And so what drives me is saying, I've got to do something myself, like Margaret's saying, what can I do? Either given my knowledge, my upbringing, my education, my drive, my competitiveness, I don't know, I'll throw all of it in on the table. But what I get concerned about, and I mentioned the word complacency before, is that individuals are waiting for another big movement to push everybody along. And it ain't going to be that way. It's got to be about individuals, given your job, your circumstance, who you work for. You don't have to, be the one holding up the banner and, all of that. But whatever you can do, you should do. And particularly with insurance, because of the lack of exposure, one of the top items Omari will call in both studies is that if you know somebody who has very little understanding of how insurance works, break it down for them. You know, this is what indemnity means. All right. This is what those terms and conditions mean. This is why your premium is high. I know we think sometimes that that's not our job, but it is your responsibility. So I think that's where it becomes a very personal thing. So you can legislate whatever you want, and you can mandate whatever you think is right, but it won't take hold unless individuals say, I think this is so important because of that humanity. And because we're seeing how in real time, how vulnerable we all are. So I come from that place that I'm trying to do this because I think it matters to everyone here. I want everybody to do well. But if I'm losing out just to make it better for you, well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And you shouldn't see me as a threat to your doing well, because I'm here to make sure that we both reach our expected goals. So I'll leave it there. But I just think this is a pivotal moment for us to really dig into these conversations.
I think you're right. It's a key time. And Laura, you look like you're ready to jump
Well,
in.
I was just going to say, when you asked the question, I had a different answer because I was focused on, recommendations that I would give the CEOs and the boards and so forth. But to go off, and one of the things I spent a lot of time thinking about is what I personally can do. What can I commit to that will make a difference? And I do think it's the millions of little conversations. The why are we doing this? Why is it important to me? Why is it important to the business situation? Why it's the right thing to do? But it's understanding who you're talking to, which could be in a one-on-one situation or a group, and having those conversations, providing them with the information, whether it's an understanding of insurance, of why it's important and so forth. And so I was trying to figure out how much time every day I could spend on this, right? It's like if whether it's reading about it or participating in a webinar such as this, or calling someone and talking to them about what their strategy is. And so my commitment is I'm going to spend at least 1 hour every day on this. And that seems so minimal to me, because then we start calculating how many hours there are in a year, in a day, it's like nothing. But if everybody, like if there's really a million willing mentors, if we all spend an hour a day thinking about how to make our world a better place for all of us. I think about my grandkids, leaving it a better place. We spend 1 hour every day. It could make a difference collectively. And I think it's those individual connections, making it real in the situation, that is our responsibility.
Thanks, Laura. That's great. Omari, can we come to you on this?
Sure, absolutely. From a systems perspective, right, as we think about the industry, one of the things I was thinking about earlier today is how the Human Rights Campaign has their Corporate Equality Index. And I love the index because it's a standard survey, and the goal for each company is to get 100% on the scorecard. And it's not a static scorecard; it changes as laws change. So it updated from domestic partner support to same-sex marriage support, right? It looked at transgender benefits, right? So I wonder if there's a space somewhere in our industry for some sort of DEI certification report, maybe, right? Some sort of standard that's a little different than Great Places to Work, for us to really, as an industry, hold each other accountable for making sure that there's not just activity, but that there really is progress when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then the last thing I would say is, and I'm 100% with you, Laura, I think the work starts with each of us. What can I individually do? One of the things I frequently say is that, there are many many issues in the world, and all of them are urgent, and all of them are dire, and all of them need us, right? And this is certainly an area where it comes to mentoring, sponsorship, inclusive workplaces, helping provide access and opportunities for others, particularly from underrepresented and historically underpowered groups. All urgent, all dire, all need us. And I am in complete agreement that if each of us figures out something that we can do, right? Maybe we spend an hour a day thinking about it and then 1 hour a week doing something. That's really what's going to take to move this forward, whether that's enlisting ourselves of a new mentee, right? Maybe someone we wouldn't normally find in the mentor-mentee ranks, or reaching out to another organization and engaging in partnership and collaboration. Certainly, that's what we're about over at NIA. And so I love this conversation that we're having, but I'm in 100% alignment that really, what I want people to think about is certainly we have some solutions and some things that we've offered in this conversation, but after you log off, what are the things that come to mind for you that you say, I can do, right? And what's within your wheelhouse and your scope of influence, and to keep pushing even outside of your scope of influence and outside of your wheelhouse to make things better for the industry at large and for the world at large.
Amari, that's great. And I'd like to thank our panel today. That's such an inspirational discussion we had today. And I'll turn it over to Margaret for our closing thoughts.
Meg, thank you so much. And thank you, Laura and Omari and Lee. I am inspired, and I'm positive, but I'm fired up. I am fired up about change. And I'm going to say this is not just an I moment, it's a we moment. We got to use both. It's an I time and it's a we time. And as women, I will say we tend to the we. I spoke in the we for a long time until a great male mentor told me, Margaret, use that powerful I. Own it. Be accountable. It's okay to say we, but you got to say I too. So we're at that pivot place. You're right, Lee. It's an I and a we moment. And let's seize it and let's move forward. That's what this group is all about. The Women in Insurance Initiative, we lock arms with NIA and APIW and the ISC group and WBC and IICF and we're doing it together. We're locking arms, and that's how we make the difference. So you're going to hear more from us about this call to action, the big things we can do, but more importantly, the small things that we can do every day, every single day to start to move that needle. So watch for our follow-up. We need your volunteer time. We need your thoughts. We need your feedback. Please join us. We're here for you. And this webinar is just the beginning. Lee, I want to thank you personally for guiding us through this journey, another journey with this congressional study. We're glad that we can talk about it. We're glad that we have this data. Now let's use that data and let's tell the story of that data and let's amp it up. Let's amp it up, everybody. So with that, I say thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Peace.